Hello and welcome to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and today we'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 22, Warriors of Eternity. So grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in with Peyton and Sarah are on a scan quest at Hunter's Perimeter, and they decide to climb a Mopedian watchtower. And at the top of that tower, a ghostly creature named Owaiki emerges and makes Sarah disappear with an attack. Peyton retrieves her scanner and calls Tom and Kaz to help look for her. Meanwhile, Sobject, Ario, and the acolytes of Dakimal visit Skara the Wise, who tells them to go find the warriors of Awaiki because they cannot be controlled by the Marillions. The boys join this group as they travel through a dangerous canyon, and Awaiki appears and fights Ihu and Kaylin, who then brainwashes the acolytes of Dakimal. Then they hear Sarah and find her and use the warriors of Awaiki to fight off the Marillion attack. And that's the episode we got. So analysis. Looking at the episode titles, this may be our last side quest mission before the sprint to the finish line of the Marillion invasion, which that is even to say that this isn't really a side quest at all because it does inherently tie back to the Marillion invasion through motivation, right? The search for the warriors of Awaiki is motivated by the undercurrent of unrest in Param. They are looking for anything that can help solve the Marillion issue, so much so that Sobject was willing to traverse the desert alone, which shows all it takes is one brave soul to break the bystander effect, but all the more reason to look for the warriors of Awaiki if they are immune to mind control, right? It's a pretty useful tool then. And thus, the search for more tools, for more power to wield, for a strategy to ward off the Marillions is the core motivation behind the Mopedians in this episode, which contrasts from the human motivations that are grounded more in we have to save Sarah's life. And Sarah being put in danger, marooned without her scanner, justifies our protagonists being witness to the grand discovery of the warriors of Awaiki, and frankly Awaiki himself, this ghost-like creature. And this episode is solidly a Param story, but the dynamic arc of the episode is really discovery, right? There is a before and after, right? There's the before finding warriors in Sarah, and then after. But we don't really get to see the after because the discovery is the end of our story. The discovery completes the narrative arc. And there's not really a driven emotional arc here other than the relief associated with finding Sarah or the confidence building of the new tool against the Marillions. But the plot is pretty straightforward in that way. We are going on an adventure that once they find the thing they are looking for, the adventure ends, right? We're looking for something and then we found a thing. Also, for such a straightforward episode, the stakes are rather high and lives are lost in this episode, and we actually have to talk about that. We have two guards who got sucked up into the storm at night, just so they could emphasize how dangerous the desert at night is, but then also that one guy got swallowed by the Mist River. No one batted an eye, but I'm here to bat an eye for you. Those three people, they all died in Param, right? And these expendable background characters emphasize the danger of the desert, and they show the stakes of traversing the desert, and that's also the justification as to why no one has found the warriors of Awaiki yet, is because it's ridiculously dangerous. So nobody is just walking through the desert and gonna stumble upon the warriors. They need a specific mission to go out there to justify the how dangerous it is to go through. They lost three soldiers at least, you know, and for the war that is the Marillion invasion, justified. If it was just a Tuesday, no, too dangerous. And so not sparing these background characters really does have a purpose because it shows the danger of going beyond the perimeter. Okay, now onto lore. So this is a lore-heavy episode, lots of lore, especially since this episode is dedicated to introduction. It's introducing you to Awaiki and his warriors. So let's start there. Awaiki. This is the first spirit creature we see in the series, and now we don't exactly know what that means yet, but it solidifies that there is gotta be some kind of justification, right, for the spirit form of Awaiki, and perhaps we will return to that. Foreshadowing! But also, the lore of who he was entails that, Owaiki and his warriors were the great protectors of the perimeter until a strange adversary turned the warriors to stone. And now, like, how unspecific? When was this, right? It was some time ago. Close history, far history, we don't know. So that's unspecific. But then also, like, who was the foe, right? Would love a flashback to explain this. What happened here? Who was the adversary? What tethered Owaiki to, like, the Param world? And, like, what helped him cross and become a spirit? There's that, but that also goes to justify why the warriors are found beyond the perimeter, and that's because they were the protectors of the perimeter. So they were protecting the perimeter, and so they were beyond, right? It makes sense locationally why they are found where they are. And we learn that in the modern day, the warriors of Waiki are these stone-covered creatures, and in order to activate them, you put a Mopedian Mujic in the Mujic-shaped cavern in their chests. And that will allow the warriors to be your allies for an amount of time, but they also emphasize that the warriors cannot be brainwashed, and that is because they are technically battle gear? Question mark? Right, let's talk about that. Because the warriors of Owaiki have a card, and it's a battle gear card, and, right, Owaiki himself, right, sure he's the spirit, but he has a creature card. And so I think whatever rock curse the warriors of Owaiki have on them that, like, makes them live forever just in interspersed segments also robs them of their creaturehood, right? And that battle gear cannot be brainwashed. So that makes sense, like, they're battle gear so they can't be brainwashed versus, like, if they were creatures they could be. But the Marillion also can't control Owaiki, and so I think that's also something we learn is that, like, Marillions can't control the spirit creatures. Let's talk a little bit more about this rock curse. We don't know what, turned the Warriors of Owaiki into Battle Gear and what curse this is, but if you look at the title of this episode, Warriors of Eternity, I think, saying that they live in interspersed segments isn't totally untrue because the Warriors of Eternity, it does kind of imply that they now live forever, but they aren't actually living because they are rocks, right? Because they are battle gear. And so that's interesting in and of itself, right? The Warriors living forever versus Owaiki himself not living at all. He's a spirit. Now onto some other lore we get includes the dangers of the perimeter, right? The storm, the Mist River, that we lost some battles in this fight. But we also get to learn about the acolytes of Dakamol, mainly that they exist and that Dakamol is their leader, and we see him in this episode, but that they are a super secret elite Mopedian strike force. And so they must have been sent here with Subject and Ario by the people in charge of the Mopedian territory, right? If they're a super secret strike force, it seems like they comply with the Mopedian government. They're probably a governmental military strike force of some kind, and so the allegiance there is interesting. But I do notice that we've been establishing a lot of groups lately with Mopedians, right? You have the War Beasts, you have Conjurers, and now you have the Acolytes of Dakamol and the Warriors of Owaiki. That's 4 groups. That's a lot of groups in, the Mopedian territory. But there's also other tribes that have been establishing groups, like we get Chaos Commandos, or we get, like, Tengith Toborn was training with a group, or Interest just used a group to help defend Kiru City from the Danians. And so it's something noteworthy to note is that we are establishing all of these, like, groups of people within broader groups of people. And, what does that do for the social entanglement of Param? Interesting to think about this. Now, the last piece of lore I want to talk about is Ihun Kalen, which in this episode they do pronounce a little bit differently than what I've been saying, which I thought was crazy, but, who's to say? But they do refer to him as the one who flooded Rao Pasak, and what does that confirm? We confirmed that the Marillions have flooded or contaminated water in all 4 tribes, right? They flooded the lava pond, they've contaminated the riverlands, they poisoned the Mount Pillar Reservoir, and now they've flooded Rao Pasak, which means in the literal background, the Marillions have successfully carried out 4 missions and created inhospitable environments for the tribes we know and love in Param. And it is, like, it's eerily spooky how the Marillions have been working in the background of our narrative. Like, there's been a couple direct conflicts, but nothing that's, like, out of the ordinary because Param's already, like, steeped in this culture of violence, and there's everyday violence between, like, underworld raids and the tribal conflict at hand. right? For an everyday Param civilian that observes these conflicts, right? The conflicts with the Marillions aren't out of the normal, but with each tribe focused on themselves, it's more difficult to see the progress the Marillions have been making as a whole. And they say it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And here are the Marillions, they've been clocking in and out. And so, like, don't be blindsided when they become an overnight success because they've been working. It also goes to show how, like, eerie and spooky it is that they've been working in the background. And like something I've been thinking about a lot recently is there is that like I don't remember exactly what it is, but it was a diary of some kind of somebody who like lived through, a historic event. And their diary is like, today, I got asked to prom by this person, I went to get groceries or something everyday and mundane, right? And then it's like P.S. Pearl Harbor happened, you know, or like P.S. life-changing event. Like in the news that like on this grand scale is like affecting the world at large. But for them, they just had a normal day. They got asked to prom and then they picked up oranges at the grocery store, you know? And so I think the way that the Marillions have been working in the background goes to show that point of like there is this like larger narrative above everyday life and then there's everyday life. And like the two impact each other like a lot, but up until this point, the two haven't collided as much as you would think they would, right? Because once they collide, things are seriously wrong, and things are seriously wrong in Param, but they haven't noticed just quite yet. And I think that's what I have to say about that. So on to fun facts and other notes. This episode opens on an oblique angle, which kind of mirrors the card Ijani Outpost, which I think the Watchtower is supposed to be that outpost. And then Peyton and Sarah, and I hate to say this, but they failed their scan quest, right? They did not get one gosh darn scan. You know, they might have, but we just didn't see it. But they didn't get a scan of the top of that tower. They didn't get any scans of like Owaiki or his warriors. Not that we saw, at least, right? They got nothing. They failed their scan quest. And now, also, I do like the continuity of Subject remembering Peyton and Tom and Kaz because, they did all meet at the Eye of the Maelstrom, and I like that they maintain that continuity. The next thing I have written down is Scare the Wise, a conjurer who has an urgent message. I could not find anything about this man. I looked him up because I wanted to figure out how to spell his name, but I could not figure out how to spell it. He's not a card, he's not nothing. And so who is this and which war beast does he conjure? That's a question. But also who is this? I would like to know. And my final note here is I want to note that time passes. They camp out for at least 1 or 2 nights in the desert, and you're trying to tell me that Sarah is as chipper as she is when they find her? Like, Owaiki must have taken good care of her because they spent 2 nights camping in the desert. Sarah's out here 2 nights alone without her scanner, right? Logistically, there's something here about staying safe in the desert. Now, my final thoughts on this episode are this episode is good, right? This is a solemn Param story with no drone battles, but plenty of battles in Param, right? We see the Marillion conflict, and it's a good story. It's memorable. Like, you remember this episode. If you see this episode, you remember this episode. And it's solid. I enjoy it and what it does for the canon and what it does for the overarching story. Even though it kind of seems like a side quest, it is still very much connected with the energy of the Marillion invasion, and I like that. So, let me know what you think if there's anything I missed, and I'll see you next time. Bye!